of those matchups is your favorite? That's going to be an epic day on Monday.
I mean, I think when I look at the matchups, the matchup between xQc and scuffed xQc is gonna be very interesting. Obviously, it's like xQc versus xQc2 or however you want to call it. But it's gonna be fun seeing the two xQc guys play against each other tomorrow. I think actual xQc is a slight favorite against Rubius. Big match, by the way, probably the marquee matchup. Obviously, as everybody knows, Rubius is one of the large. I think he is just the largest Spanish streamer on Twitch and probably also on YouTube maybe as well. Huge streamer, massive audience, and really didn't know what to expect from Rubius in this match yesterday. We assumed xQc was the favorite. I wasn't really sure if Rubius's 960 rating was legitimate. Like if he had played a few games, he hadn't played enough, or what was going on. But anyway. Rubius definitely has put in a lot of work. I think off stream with Ray Dama, the YouTuber, and also Anna Rudolph, who streams here on Twitch under Anna Chess. So, because his opening seemed very, very good. Sorry, what did I do? Okay, so E4, D5 is played, pawn takes, knight F6. Now, this is the Portuguese gambit. Now, one thing that's important with the Portuguese gambit, and I would say this to xQc because I'm pretty confident that he'll probably see this video whenever he wakes up, is that what you want to do is you do not actually guard the pawn. Knight c3, which he played, is a great move. Another good move to play here is d4, and if knight takes pawn, you just go c4, kick the knight back. You can go to both these squares, and now you go knight to c3, let's say knight to c6, and you go bishop to e3. And when black pushes the pawn, black has to develop somehow here, right? So if black goes e6, he closes this diagonal. So when you close the diagonal, now white can very harmoniously play knight to f3. Let's just say bishop e7 or even bishop b4. It doesn't really matter which one. And you just go bishop d3, line up the diagonal, castle your king. So for example, let's say castles. I'm not really sure what black should do. Let's say black plays rook to e8 here. Now you can play something like queen to c2, target the pawn, and after h6 you just move either your rook to, actually you just move the rook to d1 and keep it very smooth. Rook to e1 next move. Black can't really develop these two pieces because this bishop wants to be here, and so you want to bring your rook to the center as well, but because the bishop is in the way, this is really good. And if black pushes the pawn, you just takes, and now you fossilize him with bishop h7 check, and you collect the queen on d8 next move. So it's really important for the free flow of the game to play like that. Now that being said, the reason you play it like this instead of knight f3 first is because black now gets the bishop out, and he's going to put a lot of pressure on your central pawn here with the bishop and the knight. So you go bishop e3 first, and now if black tries to not play e6, let's say he plays g6 to keep the diagonal open, this is really bad because now you go pawn to d5, and now black does not have time to fianchetto his bishop here. He has to move the knight to like e5, or let's just say e5, and then bishop d4, you target this diagonal, and if black goes bishop g7, you just go pawn to f4, and black's going to lose some material here, either the knight on e5 or the bishop on g7. And if black goes back again, you can play bishop to d4 and you disrupt the development. Black would have loved to have the bishop on g7, but after bishop to d4, it's really difficult for black to play here. He kind of has to play f6 or rook g8. Not very pleasant, to put it mildly. So that's kind of what I would say in terms of general stuff. Knight c3, however, is a completely reasonable move. Bishop g4, knight f3. Now I personally would recommend playing bishop to e2, and after bishop takes bishop, queen takes, and if let's just say black takes, you can just finish your development, knight to f3. If black plays knight takes knight, I would actually recommend that you take this way, which will actually play into the next game, which we look at, the second game between xQc and Rubius. And the point is that now you can develop your bishop and bring your rook to the center of the board immediately. Once you move this bishop to either g5 or the f4 square, you bring your rook to the center and create a lot of pressure down the d file. So I would have preferred bishop to e2. Knight f3 is okay. Again, after knight takes d5, I think you really need to break this pin and play bishop to e2 here. Instead, xQc takes, and now he plays h3. Again, this is all relatively fine, but you have to develop your bishop and castle your king out of the center immediately. It's really important here to play it like this. Instead, he plays h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, and now he goes d3, which I really like. Good move here, stopping the threats in the center of the board. Knight to c6, bishop to f4, castles, and now xQc plays bishop g2. Now I think in this position it's important again that xQc, having pushed these two pawns on the king's side, what you want to do is you want to move the bishop this way and just castle your king again as quickly as possible so that you can move your knight to one of these squares in the center and try to create some fossils. Additionally, what I would say about this position is that since kings are castled on opposite sides, what you want to do is you want to play like a3, b4, and b5. You really need to use your pawns here on the queen side to start attacking and taking space to attack the black pieces, because what xQc did in the game was he played this. Now again, he could have done something like bishop g2 castles followed by bishop e3, which was playable, because in the game here, if he goes bishop e3, it's still worse, but he can do the same thing. But when you go bishop f4, you actually just give your opponent an extra move, extra tempo with e5 to hit the bishop. So for example, if you go here, castles, and bishop e3, you'll notice after e5 it's white's move, so you can just castle. And in the game, as you see in this position, it's not white's move to castle, it's black's move. And here Rubius plays knight b4, a3, and now e4, which is not objectively the best move, but he really puts pressure on the center of the board. And I think that in this position xQc started getting very nervous, and now he played d4, which is a very big blunder. Pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes bishop, and at this point it's already really bad. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit because Rubius plays this pretty much perfectly. I have nothing much to say for the next bit of moves. Like right about here, Rubius blunders with bishop f5. In this position, if Rubius plays bishop to d5, he can kind of anchor his bishop by putting a pawn on c6, and white has no pawns to remove it, or even knights. He just has a dark square bishop and a rook. So if black anchors the bishop like bishop d5 and c6, he can then bring the rook down to a2 or to e8, and long-term black should be winning here. So instead he plays bishop f5, big blunder, because now pawn takes bishop is played here by xQc. And after pawn takes bishop, it gets really difficult to play, because after b6, rook g7, xQc starts to take over here in this late middle game. And honestly, no kappa, from here on I have really very little to say, because xQc played this extremely well here. Like bishop g5 was good, rook f6 was good here, and now bishop e7, and xQc went rook g6. Now in this position, xQc should have gone rook to e6 with the pin of the bishop and the king, because if black goes rook takes pawn, you can just play bishop takes bishop or rook takes bishop as well, and you're up a juicer. And if you go rook to d7, quite simply white can just trade everything off here, and you run your king, and you're gonna create a queen with one of these passed pawns, either the b pawn or the h pawn here, and it's a forced win. Now instead, xQc goes rook g6, trades rook g7 and rook c7, and now finds this check. Important check, by the way, because here it's actually a very tricky endgame. Now objectively, I think at a professional level this probably is still winning for white. I think probably you go king. It's actually very tricky. I'm not sure this is winning. King d3, king c4 maybe is winning, but it's very tricky, very tricky position to play. Instead he goes check. Now Rubius makes the final blunder. He moves the king to e5. He needed to move the king back to e7. The idea being that right now black wants to take the pawn, but the rook is threatening to capture your pawn. So what happens here is that when white brings the king close, you actually use your king to attack the rook, and now the rook has to move off the c file. You can't keep it on these squares. So when the rook moves away, now the pawn is no longer under attack because your rook left the square, and now you just go rook takes pawn, and the endgame goes on. Instead, Rubius goes king e5, and after rook c5, the rest of this game is pretty straightforward. What I would have recommended actually for xQc for basic technique and making checkmate would be to go rook e5, and when black goes here, you plant the pawn here, and the rook is glued to this square. The rook is just permanently glued, so now black can keep moving, but you just ignore it, and now you just run the juicer down the board very simply. No stress. Make a queen, you go check, and then checkmate. And so I think it's not something that really is that important, but it's something xQc should be aware of, is that if you can like glue a rook to a square where it's guarded, like for example even something like this, if you can protect it with the king, the rook and the king are safe, and now they're glued, and now you just push the pawn down, make the queen, and just do your ladder technique. So it is something that is important in general terms. It's not really that big of a deal because xQc wins anyway, but just something to keep in mind. So anyway, xQc does eventually go on to win this game, makes a check, and queen f7, and he wins the game because the king guards the queen, Rook guards all 3 squares here. King cannot go to any of these squares, and that's GG. So xQc wins his first game and moves ahead 1-0. So let's move to the second game between Rubius and xQc. This game starts e4 e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes d6. Now xQc, as we know from the first 2 PogChamps, have played a lot of games with knight takes e4, blundering queen to e2. In fact, one of the earliest games that he played, maybe not on stream, but that he played in a notable match, was the match all the way back, I believe, in June. It was a match between Rekful and xQc, rest in peace Byron, and he had this, and Rekful did play knight to c6 check, attacking the queen and checking the king at the same time. Discovered attack, winning the queen on d8. If black blocks, you take. If black blocks with the queen, you just take the queen. So obviously xQc very familiar with it. He also had this against, I believe, Ludwig as well in PogChamps 1 on top of that. So he definitely learned from it. He played d6 to attack the knight. Knight to f3, knight takes e4. Rubius plays knight c3, knight takes, pawn takes, queen e7. Not the best move here. There are a few things. First of all, normally white should actually take with the pawn, the d pawn here. But I understand the reasoning behind it, which was to try and play d4 and build a big center here. So sorry about that. So from Rubius' standpoint, I think the idea is what you want is you want to go d4 castles and bishop d3, get this great op on d3 that targets the pawn. You can castle and maybe play knight g5 down the road. Now I could be wrong on that. It could have just been pure inspiration at the spot, on the spot kind of. But that's my guess in terms of why Rubius played this opening. Instead, xQc goes check. Probably not the best move. I think just bishop e7 and develop. Probably something like d4 castles, bishop d3, and then you can play something like, there are many options here, but probably I'd recommend playing c5 castles and knight to c6. The idea being that you want to put pressure on the center, but you also want to move your bishop out and target on this diagonal as well. So something like this would have made sense to me. So instead he goes queen e7, bishop to e2, knight c6. Again, good developing moves. Bishop f5, d4 castles. Again, not necessarily the most precise way to play this by xQc, but he does develop his knight, his bishop, and castles king. So I cannot really say anything critical about that. The one issue with this sort of setup is that in terms of Rubius, when you have double pawns, very oftentimes they're considered to be bad. So what you want to do is when you have double pawns, you want to try to play on open files. It's really important to do that. So if I was Rubius, I would have played either rook b1 or pawn to d5 here. And the point behind d5 is that you'll look at this position and you see black has nothing over on this side of the board. It's just a king and a bunch of pawns. So you're very vulnerable over here. And I can go like queen d4, rook b1, bishop to e3, and there's a lot of pressure coming down towards your king immediately on the queen side. So in this case, double pawns are actually okay, but when you get double stacked pawns like this, you usually the reason that it's playable is because you can take an open file. That's what I think is really important to note. So bishop g5 is played, f6, bishop h4, g5. Great move by xQc. Again, kind of going the wrong direction. I would have liked to have seen Rubius go bishop e3 and d5. Again, line up threats on this diagonal and this open b file towards the black king. So bishop g5, f6, bishop h4. Now xQc plays g5. Great move. Bishop g3, h5. Trying to play h4 and trap the bishop with this pawn chain of 3 here. Bishop will have no squares. d5 is now played by Rubius. Fantastic move, by the way. I cannot state enough how great Rubius played in this match. So knight e5, rook to e1, and now here xQc goes g4, which is a mistake. What he should have played was pawn to h4, because after bishop takes e5, you can now take, I think you take with the d pawn, and the reason you do this is because you keep the chain alive, but you also activate your bishop and your queen. So like, let's say queen d2, you can go like queen a3 and bishop c5 and target with your bishop holding everything. So that's kind of why h4 is a better move, because it provokes the bishop, and after takes, you take this way, you keep your chain intact, but you open up this whole diagonal for your queen and your bishop to create a lot of threats down towards the white king and guard your queen side. So h4 would have been better. xQc goes g4. Now the reason that this is not as good is because you'll notice once you go g4, this bishop actually has squares to go to. So for example, if you move the bishop, white can even play a move like bishop h4 and prevent your pawns from continuing to march down the board. He can blockade them here. So that's why kind of g4 is not as good. Now in the game, xQc here plays c5, just blunders this bishop. Big mistake. Credit to Rubius for finding this. Queen h7, bishop d3, knight takes, queen takes, a6, rook b1. Great move by Rubius, takes the open file. He also has rook e6, great bastion on f5 with the horse, and everything is looking very bad for xQc. So he goes b5, c4, b4, c a3. Great move by Rubius, trying to open up the queen side. a5, c3, another fantastic move by Rubius, trying to rip open this open file, use the rook on the b file to win the game. So xQc takes, and now Rubius goes queen b2, another perfect move, creates multiple checkmate patterns. And actually checkmate here is not really preventable. If you move the king, this is checkmate because your king cannot cross the e file because my rook on e1 holds it. If you move like the king up, I just go checkmate. So I'm threatening multiple checkmates. I have multiple checkmate patterns, and so xQc goes queen d7 to stop queen b7 checkmate. Now the unfortunate thing for Rubius here is that he actually he highlighted the b7 square with his queen. And if he had not highlighted the square, I think it's very likely that he would have seen that queen to b8 was checkmate and won. But because he highlighted the square like this with an arrow, I think he forgot there was another square up that he could go to. So it was very unfortunate from that standpoint, because he played pretty much a perfect game up to this point. If he goes queen b8, he just wins the game. Instead he goes queen f6, bishop g7, and now he makes a huge blunder. Queen takes pawn. And after rook takes bishop, now black ends up with 2 rooks and a bishop against 2 rooks. Rook e3, bishop d4, rook b3. Another very good move by Rubius, by the way. It threatens a very dirty checkmate. So let's say black just goes a4, or actually no, let's say black goes rook to e8, just a logical move developing. White can go rook to b8, king d7, and now you bring the other rook up, and it's actually checkmate because the king can't go back, your rook covers the squares, and the king can't come up either because his pawn holds it, and so your king is actually checkmated here. So rather impressively, xQc goes rook h d8, and he creates the gateway. So now when white checks, you can go king d7, rook b7, and now you go king d8. You just create this nice little gateway by putting the rook on d8, and you run your king over to e8, and you're completely safe here. So instead h3 is played here. xQc goes g takes, pawn takes, a4, rook b6 trades, king c7, rook f8. Perfect moves by xQc. Very important that when you look at the position here, white has 1 passed pawn to go up the board. So as long as you keep your king in front of the pawn, white will never really be able to force up the board because he only has a 1 rook alone. So it's very good to keep the king in front of the pawn, and otherwise you see all the other pawns, these pawns, these pawns, and these pawns. There's no passed pawn for anybody here. So it's very good. So d6, king c6, great move. Rook e6, king d7, takes, h4, and the final sort of blunder with h4, because now after king e7, the rest is pretty straightforward. Not much really that I need to go over. Check and rook f3. Absolutely perfect finish by xQc to win this match and or win this game and win the match 2-0. So what I would say about this match is a couple of things. First of all, I think Rubius is taking this very seriously. Very strong player, improving a lot. I was very impressed by his play. It seemed like he got a little bit careless late in the game. Now, of course, it's very difficult to stay focused the whole time. It's very difficult to avoid blunders, but it seems like he's got the opening phase down and he's very solid. He just needs to work on sort of this late part of the game and being a little bit more focused, because objectively he probably should have won both of these games, is what I would say. That being said, xQc also played pretty well in the opening phase. He needs to work on his openings. It seems like that's where he's getting into a lot of trouble, whereas his middle game and end game, he actually played really well. I thought his end game, the way that he kept in it, he didn't sort of collapse, was really important. So it was very impressive the way he kept it together. No mauling, no collapsing, just kept staying in the game and finding good moves.